How did you come up with the cooperation bridge?
The cooperation points. We sat down and said, what is the most diabolical thing that we can do to a team? No, that's not how it happened. Everything at game design is a process, and it was one of those things that we weren't really sure. We try to incorporate cooperation into the game some way. A lot of times in the past, we've used things like scoring for the other, your opposing team, or your other opposing alliance. We, to some degree, have realized that that probably is not being received as well as other ways of trying to have cooperation. The other thing is, if we're going to have cooperation, we wanted to make sure that teams try to cooperate. So one of the best ways, and there's a lot of dialogue, and I actually think it was a great solution by forcing the teams to cooperate in order to get their ranking points. And what that does is it's a subtle way of making sure that teams actually do attempt to work with each other and cooperate. Because we understand, first of all, we know how hard it is just for an alliance that does not work together to get together and try to do some things. And then if you compound it by having that alliance also work with the other alliance to do it, that is truly amazing. And that is something that we're trying to really get teams to do, because it is so amazing. And it's really to your credit that I've seen so many teams go out there and work within your alliance and then work within the other alliance to actually see this happen. So that's something that's part of the magic of FRC and part of the magic of FIRST. And we made it so that if you didn't do it, you wish you would have. And at the same time, that we wanted to make it part of the game, so it really wasn't something that you're kind of off, doing something that's really unusual or different, or scoring for the other team, or something that's just really very, very unusual. Does anybody have any other comments?
One of the things I noticed about cooperation was the fact that it made you appreciate Gracia's professionalism, because instead of winning by a lot of points, I've seen robots actually get off the bridge, their own bridge, and go over and balance on the cooperation bit. I thought that was just cool.
Okay, other questions? I'm driving Kristen crazy. I'm moving around. I'm sorry.
A few times in the rules, you mentioned the instance when a basketball would pass through the hoop as the deciding factor for scoring. Yet in practice, what usually happened is it was judged off when the ball passed through the sensors. In the future, are you considering changing the rules such to say points will be awarded as soon as the ball passes through the sensor assembly?
The intent was trying to get to real-time scoring. And what we're trying to do is take the human element and human factor out of scoring as much as we possibly can. In basketball, when it goes through the hoop, it's basically scored. We can't do that. Unfortunately, when we're trying to make adaptations and trying to come up with solutions and trying to make all of the adjustments on the field, we end up trying to use the best solutions that we have. So in reality, it is, as you have pointed out, when the ball goes through the sensor. And that's part of what we do even now in autonomous. I mean, even if the ball is launched, it goes through the hoop. If it doesn't make it through to the sensor, we're considering that to be not scored until the sensor picks it up. And part of the reason is we feel that the sensor is much more consistent and much more reliable than the human eye. So if we would rely on human interface to make that happen, the other possibility was somehow lining the rim of the basket with sensors or something, and that has its own problems. And so we ended up going with the easier, simpler solution, which in order to be robust and try to make sure that we're capable of creating it over and over and over again and getting the same result, we ended up going with what we had. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the bottom line is we're trying to make it so that we take out the human error part. So we're trying to use the sensors to make sure that when the ball scores through that sensor, that it's considered to be scored. Other comments?
No, I would just say that I think it is something that we recognize as a potential area for improvement. It is cleaning up that little thing. However, that as soon as Sunday comes, the rule, is is irrelevant. Yeah, we're not going to change it for, off seasons or anything like that. And so, but it is something that I think we'll look at, going forward to make sure that the score is concrete. But like Bill said, the real-time scoring we thought was very important.
The other thing is, if you do off-season events, and we have experienced this on a number of occasions, if you decide to change the rules, it's an off-season event. It's no longer a sanctioned official FRC event for competing against all the other teams. And I know at IRI and some of the other ones, they make some very interesting rule changes, and sometimes we observe that and try to digest it and figure out, well, is this something that is really interesting and something we want to integrate into future games, or what do we want to do? So, other questions? Yes.
Just interested in the rationale behind adding the penalty points immediately to the score of the other team.
Okay, the question was about adding the points. And this year in particular, well, let's see, let me go back. There's this gentleman by the name of Dean Kamen. He's somewhat influential within our organization. And to kind of paraphrase what Dean says is, I'm standing there, I'm looking at the score, and it's Red Alliance 40 and the Blue Alliance 10, and the game ends and the score comes down, and the next thing you know, the score goes up after all the referees get around for 5 minutes, and 5 minutes later the score comes up, and now it's the Red Alliance is 60 and the Blue Alliance is 70 or something. So that's a paraphrase. But the bottom line was, there was a long pause very often in the games, very, very long pause sometimes, where the referees all had to get together. They had to talk over what the points were, or the penalties were for points. Then we had to get back to the scoring table, make sure it all got inputted. It was somewhat confusing, and if somebody came in from the audience who didn't have a clue as to what was going on, it became even more confusing. So, since it was basketball, and since there are free throws for the other team if there are fouls, we decided that we were going to have the refs give automatic three additional points for the other team, based upon them observing a penalty. Now, if it's a technical foul, those would be something that the teams would be able to come and talk to the referee about. And the reason we didn't have it for other penalty points is, believe it or not, there are some teams out there that every time they get a penalty, whether they know they're deserved it or not, they'll go up to the referee and they'll want to talk to the referee about the penalty points. And it really ties up the referee's time, it ties up the game. The intent is to be fair to all the teams, to try to be as impartial as we possibly can, and at the same time, we have a lot of teams to make sure that they get an opportunity to play. And we're trying to give the teams an opportunity to play 10 rounds. Some events, 11 rounds and 12 rounds. So the intent is we can end up having a lot of times to talk about scores, we can have time to do a bunch of other things, or we can have that time to give teams an opportunity to play. So we thought it was a good balance so that you can end up having that type of a penalty happen right away. The audience sees that there is a penalty. Everybody knows what's going on. The opposing teams all see what the score is right now. And then right now, especially with the balancing, it gives you an opportunity. Do I take a few more shots before I go and balance? Do I have to? Because I just found out somebody in our alliance got a penalty. I got to get a few more shots before we go balance. So it also gives them real-time information, so hopefully the teams can make a better selection and a better choice. So that's the reason. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Yes.
One thing we heard yesterday too on the topic, talking to the division head refs last night, and all of them have done multiple events this year as both a head ref and a regular referee, was they felt that it made the referees a little more responsible, because you had to make a decision right then and put it in, and then it was done. And so instead of maybe I saw a foul and I'll go talk to people about it after the match, it really took kind of their level of commitment to what was happening right in front of them up a notch, they felt, from the way it had been, maybe been a couple of years before. And so I think that was another added benefit I don't think we really thought about, but it certainly came to play.
And on the original question about adding points to your opponent's score, I think there's also something, for lack of a better term, kind of touchy-feely about that. Instead of a penalty causing something bad to happen to somebody, a penalty causes something good to happen to the opponent. It's the same net gain or loss for that particular alliance, but it's just gentler, kinder way to talk about it. When you do something wrong, we're going to give your opponent points, as opposed to when you do something wrong, we're going to take points away from you. So it's a different message, I think, underlying all of that I think is also an improvement.